The morning sun blazed over the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado, California. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her rental car and surveyed the sprawling facility where she would spend the next 2 weeks as a hand-to-hand combat instructor. At 28 years old, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall with a lean but muscular build that spoke of years dedicated to martial arts and military training. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had proven herself in combat zones across 3 continents. Sarah had been selected for this assignment based on her exceptional record in the Army's Special Operations community. She held black belts in 3 different martial arts disciplines and had developed innovative close-quarters combat techniques during her deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Navy had specifically requested her expertise to enhance their SEAL training program, particularly in situations where firearms were not viable options. As she walked toward the administrative building, Sarah couldn't help but notice the stares from various personnel around the compound. Some were curious, others skeptical, and a few openly dismissive. She had grown accustomed to such reactions throughout her military career. Being a woman in special operations meant constantly proving herself, but she had long since stopped letting it affect her performance. Commander James Harrison, the training facility's commanding officer, met her at the entrance. He was a tall man in his mid-40s with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in naval special warfare. His handshake was firm but brief, and his expression remained professionally neutral. "Chief Mitchell, welcome to Coronado," he said as they walked through the corridors lined with photos of SEAL teams throughout history. "I'll be honest with you. There was some debate about bringing in an outside instructor, especially for our advanced combat course. These men have been through some of the most rigorous training in the world." Sarah nodded, understanding the underlying message. "I appreciate your candor, sir. I'm here to share techniques that have proven effective in real-world scenarios. I'm confident the training will be mutually beneficial." They entered a large briefing room where approximately 300 SEALs were gathered. The room fell silent as Sarah walked to the front, and she could feel the weight of their collective scrutiny. These were men who had earned their place among the military's elite through extraordinary physical and mental challenges. Many had multiple combat deployments and years of experience in the most dangerous operations imaginable. Commander Harrison introduced her to the assembled group. "Gentlemen, this is Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell from Army Special Operations. She'll be conducting advanced hand-to-hand combat training over the next 2 weeks. I expect you to give her the same attention and respect you would any other instructor." As the commander spoke, Sarah noticed the subtle reactions throughout the room. Some men leaned back in their chairs with skeptical expressions. Others whispered comments to their teammates. A few maintained professional attention, but she could sense the underlying doubt about what a woman could teach them about combat that they didn't already know. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran with 15 years in the teams, raised his hand. "Sir, with all due respect, we've been through extensive combat training. What specific techniques will Chief Mitchell be teaching that aren't already covered in our curriculum?" Sarah stepped forward before the commander could respond. "Senior Chief, that's an excellent question. I'll be focusing on close-quarters techniques for situations where you're outnumbered, outgunned, or in confined spaces where traditional combat methods aren't effective. These are techniques I've developed and refined during multiple deployments in urban combat environments." Petty Officer First Class Derek Thompson, known among his peers for his size and strength, leaned forward. "Ma'am, no disrespect intended, but most of us have been in similar situations. We've all been through advanced combat training, and many of us have real-world experience. What makes your techniques different?" The question hung in the air, and Sarah could sense this was a pivotal moment. She had faced similar challenges before, but never in front of such a large group of elite operators. She knew that her credibility would be determined not by her credentials or the commander's introduction, but by her ability to demonstrate value to these experienced professionals. "That's a fair question, Petty Officer Thompson," she replied calmly. "Rather than explain the differences, I prefer to demonstrate them. I believe practical application speaks louder than theoretical discussion." The commander looked somewhat uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Chief Mitchell, perhaps we should start with the planned curriculum and save demonstrations for the training sessions. But Sarah could sense the mood in the room. These men needed to be convinced, and words alone wouldn't accomplish that goal. Sir, if you don't mind, I'd like to address their concerns directly. It might help establish the foundation for effective training. She turned back to the group. I understand your skepticism. You're among the best trained warriors in the world, and you should question anything that claims to improve upon your existing skills. But I've learned that the most dangerous assumption in combat is believing you've seen everything there is to see. Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Park, sitting in the middle of the group, spoke up. Chief, are you saying our training is inadequate? Not at all, Sarah responded. I'm saying that combat is constantly evolving, and so should our techniques. The situations I've encountered in urban environments often required adaptations that weren't covered in traditional training programs. Small modifications that can mean the difference between mission success and failure. The room remained skeptical, but she could sense a slight shift in attention. These were professionals who understood the importance of mission success, and any legitimate advantage would be of interest to them. Senior Chief Rodriguez pressed further. Can you give us a specific example of a situation where traditional techniques weren't sufficient? Sarah paused, considering how much operational detail she could share. 3 years ago, during a hostage rescue operation in an Iraqi urban environment, my team encountered a situation where we were vastly outnumbered in a confined space. Traditional combat techniques would have resulted in casualties among both our team and the hostages. The techniques I developed allowed us to neutralize multiple threats quickly and quietly, completing the mission without any friendly casualties. Petty Officer Thompson leaned back with a slight smirk. That's an impressive story, ma'am, but stories and reality are often different things. Combat situations are unpredictable, and what works once might not work again. Sarah nodded in agreement. You're absolutely right, Petty Officer Thompson. That's exactly why these techniques focus on adaptability rather than rigid movements. They're designed to be modified based on the specific situation and opponent. The questioning continued for several more minutes, with various SEALs challenging different aspects of her background and approach. Sarah answered each question professionally, never becoming defensive, but also never backing down from her position. She could sense that she was being tested not just on her knowledge, but on her ability to handle pressure and maintain composure under scrutiny. Finally, Senior Chief Rodriguez stood up. Chief Mitchell, I think I speak for most of the men here when I say we'd be interested in seeing a practical demonstration of these techniques. Would you be willing to show us what you're talking about? The room fell completely silent. Sarah looked at Commander Harrison, who appeared somewhat concerned about the direction things were heading. She understood his position. Allowing an untested demonstration in front of 300 SEALs could quickly become a public relations disaster if things went wrong. I'd be happy to provide a demonstration, Sarah said carefully. But I want to establish some ground rules to ensure everyone's safety. Petty Officer Thompson stood up, his 6'3" frame towering over most of the room. Ma'am, I'd be willing to volunteer for a demonstration. I've been doing martial arts for 12 years, and I've been through every combat course the Navy offers. If your techniques are as effective as you claim, they should work against someone with my background. Sarah studied Thompson carefully. He was clearly in excellent physical condition, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to physical challenges. His offer was both an opportunity and a potential trap. If she succeeded, she would establish credibility with the entire group. If she failed, her authority would be undermined before the training even began. I appreciate your willingness to volunteer, Petty Officer Thompson, she said. But I want to make sure everyone understands that these techniques can cause serious injury if not applied carefully. I don't want anyone getting hurt during a demonstration. Thompson's smirk widened slightly. I can handle myself, ma'am. I've been in plenty of training situations, and I know how to tap out if things get uncomfortable. Commander Harrison stepped forward. I'm not sure this is the best approach for our first day. Perhaps we should proceed with the planned orientation and save practical work for the training sessions. But Sarah could see that the momentum in the room was building toward a confrontation. These men needed to see proof of her abilities, and avoiding the challenge would likely damage her credibility more than accepting it. She had been in similar situations before, and She knew that sometimes the best way to establish respect was through direct demonstration. Sir, if you're comfortable with it, I think a controlled demonstration might actually be beneficial, she said. It would give everyone a clear understanding of what we'll be working on during the training sessions. The commander looked around the room, clearly weighing the potential risks and benefits. The SEALs were obviously interested in seeing how this would play out, and refusing the demonstration might create more problems than allowing it. Very well, he said finally. But I want this kept strictly professional, and I want clear safety protocols established before anyone makes physical contact. Sarah nodded and turned back to the group. Before we do anything, I want to establish some ground rules. This is a demonstration, not a competition. The goal is education, not victory. Both participants should be aware that techniques will be applied with control, and either party can stop the demonstration at any time. Petty Officer Thompson nodded confidently. Understood, ma'am. I'm ready whenever you are. The group began moving chairs and clearing a space in the center of the room. Sarah could feel the anticipation building among the SEALs, and she knew that the next few minutes would largely determine how effective her training program would be. She had faced similar challenges throughout her career, but never with stakes quite this high. As the space was cleared, Senior Chief Rodriguez stepped forward to act as an unofficial referee. All right, let's keep this professional and safe. Chief Mitchell, what kind of demonstration did you have in mind? Sarah looked around the room at the expectant faces. 300 of the Navy's elite operators were waiting to see if she could back up her claims with action. She had spent years developing her skills and techniques, and now it was time to put them to the test in front of the most challenging audience she had ever faced. Sarah took a deep breath and moved to the center of the cleared space. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the room, and she could hear the quiet shuffling of boots as the SEALs positioned themselves for the best view. Petty Officer Thompson rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck, displaying the casual confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation. For this demonstration, I'd like to show you techniques designed for situations where you're grabbed or restrained by multiple opponents, Sarah explained to the room. These scenarios often occur during close-quarters operations when stealth is compromised, and you need to neutralize threats quickly without using firearms. Thompson nodded and moved into position. How do you want to set this up, ma'am? Sarah considered the options carefully. She needed to demonstrate something impressive enough to capture their attention, but controlled enough to avoid injury. Let's start with a basic restraint scenario. You grab my wrist from the front, as if you're trying to control my movement or prevent me from reaching a weapon. Thompson stepped forward and grasped both of her wrists firmly. His hands were large enough to completely encircle her forearms, and his grip was strong enough that a traditional escape would be difficult. Sarah could see the satisfaction in his eyes as he established control. The conventional response would be to pull against the grip or try to twist free, she said to the watching SEALs. But that requires you to match or exceed your opponent's strength, which isn't always possible. She demonstrated a few traditional escape attempts, showing how Thompson could easily counter them with his size and strength advantage. The SEALs watched with interest, but she could sense their growing confidence that this would play out as expected. Instead, Sarah continued, I focus on targeting the structural weaknesses in the grip itself. Without warning, Sarah's hands rotated in a precise motion that targeted the space between Thompson's thumb and fingers. Her movement was so quick and unexpected that his grip was broken before he could react. But instead of stepping away, she immediately moved closer, using his moment of surprise to her advantage. Her left hand shot forward in a controlled strike toward his solar plexus, while her right hand moved to control his balance. Thompson, caught off guard by the speed and precision of her movement, stumbled backward. Sarah flowed with his movement, using his momentum against him while maintaining perfect control of the demonstration. In less than 3 seconds, Thompson found himself off balance and at a severe disadvantage, with Sarah in a position to apply several different control techniques. She held the position for a moment to ensure everyone could see the result, then immediately stepped back and released her control. The key is understanding that strength isn't always the determining factor in close combat. she explained as Thompson regained his footing. Timing, precision, and understanding your opponent's balance points can overcome significant physical disadvantages. Thompson looked surprised but not defeated. That was good, ma'am. I wasn't expecting that particular technique. Can we try it again? Sarah could see the competitive fire in his eyes, and she understood that this was becoming more than just a demonstration. The room had grown quieter, with the SEALs paying closer attention to what they had just witnessed. Certainly, she replied. But, this time, I'd like to show you a technique for dealing with multiple attackers. Senior Chief Rodriguez looked concerned. Chief, we only have one volunteer. Sarah smiled slightly. Actually, I was hoping a couple more people might be willing to participate. The technique I want to demonstrate requires multiple opponents to be effective. Petty Officer First Class Mike Chin stepped forward. I'll volunteer, ma'am. He was followed by Petty Officer Second Class Alex Johnson, both men with extensive martial arts backgrounds and the same confident bearing as Thompson. Commander Harrison looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the demonstration. Chief Mitchell, I want to emphasize the importance of keeping this safe and controlled. Absolutely, sir, Sarah responded. I'll be using the minimum force necessary to demonstrate the techniques, and I'll stop immediately if anyone requests it. The three SEALs spread out around her in a triangle formation, each maintaining about arm's reach distance. This was a scenario Sarah had encountered multiple times in actual combat situations, and she had developed specific techniques for dealing with such circumstances. The traditional response to multiple attackers is to try to keep them separated and deal with them one at a time, she explained. But that strategy requires a lot of space and time, neither of which you often have in urban combat situations. Thompson moved first, attempting to grab her from the front while Chun approached from her left side. Sarah's response was fluid and precise, using Thompson's forward momentum to redirect him into Chen's path, while simultaneously controlling his balance. As the two SEALs collided, she used their moment of confusion to position herself advantageously relative to Johnson. Her movements were economical and controlled, but devastatingly effective. Within seconds, all three SEALs found themselves off balance, tangled with each other, and unable to mount an effective attack. Sarah maintained control of the situation without applying excessive force, demonstrating her point about technique over strength. The room erupted in surprised murmurs as the three SEALs untangled themselves. These were men who prided themselves on their physical capabilities, and they had just been outmaneuvered by someone significantly smaller than any of them. Petty Officer Thompson straightened his uniform and looked at Sarah with newfound respect. Ma'am, I have to admit, that wasn't what I expected. Those techniques are definitely different from anything we've trained on. Chin nodded in agreement. The way you used our own movement against us was impressive. I couldn't tell what was happening until it was over. Johnson rubbed his shoulder where he had collided with Chun. Can you break down how you did that? I'd like to understand the mechanics behind those movements. Sarah could sense a shift in the room's atmosphere. The skeptical murmurs had been replaced by interested questions and respectful attention. The demonstration had accomplished its purpose, but she knew this was just the beginning. I'll be covering all of these techniques in detail during our training sessions, she said. But the basic principle is to use your opponent's energy and momentum against them rather than trying to oppose their strength directly. Senior Chief Rodriguez stepped forward. Chief Mitchell, that was genuinely impressive. I think you've answered any questions we might have had about your qualifications. But Petty Officer Thompson wasn't quite ready to concede. Ma'am, if you don't mind, I'd like to try one more scenario. That time, you caught us off guard because we weren't expecting your techniques. Could you handle the same situation if we were prepared for your approach? The challenge hung in the air, and Sarah could see that this was another testing moment. Thompson was essentially asking if her techniques would work against opponents who understood what she was trying to do. Commander Harrison stepped forward. I think we've seen enough for today. Chief Mitchell has clearly demonstrated her capabilities. But Sarah raised her hand gently. Sir, I think Petty Officer Thompson raises a valid point. These techniques need to work against prepared opponents, not just surprised ones. She turned to address Thompson directly. What scenario did you have in mind? Thompson considered for a moment. How about a situation where I grab you in a bear hug from behind? That's a common restraint technique, and It would give me maximum leverage advantage. This was a significantly more challenging scenario than the previous demonstrations. A proper bear hug from someone of Thompson's size would be difficult to escape using conventional techniques, and the margin for error was much smaller. That's a legitimate scenario, Sarah agreed. But I want to be very clear about safety protocols. A bear hug can cause serious injury if applied with full force. Thompson nodded seriously. I'll apply just enough pressure to establish control, ma'am. I have no intention of actually hurting you. The SEALs formed a wider circle around them, clearly anticipating something more dramatic than the previous demonstrations. Sarah positioned herself with her back to Thompson and waited for him to establish his grip. When Thompson wrapped his arms around her from behind, Sarah could immediately feel the enormous strength differential. His arms encircled her torso completely, and his size advantage was overwhelming. In a real combat situation, this would be a life-threatening scenario requiring immediate and decisive action. As you can see, Sarah said calmly, despite being firmly held, this appears to be an impossible situation. The attacker has maximum leverage, and traditional escape attempts would be ineffective. She demonstrated a few conventional responses, showing how Thompson could easily counter them with minimal effort. The watching SEALs could see that normal techniques would indeed be useless in this situation. However, Sarah continued, every grip has specific weak points, and every position has disadvantages as well as advantages. Without warning, Sarah dropped her weight slightly and shifted her balance in a way that forced Thompson to adjust his grip to maintain control. As he made that adjustment, she exploited the momentary weakness to create space for her real escape technique. Her movement was explosive but controlled, targeting specific pressure points while using leverage in a way that amplified her strength advantage. Thompson found his grip broken and his balance compromised before he could react to her counterattack. But Sarah wasn't finished. As Thompson tried to recover his balance, she flowed into a control technique that put him at a severe disadvantage. Her movements were so smooth and efficient that many of the watching SEALs couldn't follow exactly what had happened. Thompson found himself controlled and off balance, unable to mount any effective resistance. Sarah held the position for a few seconds to ensure everyone could see the result, then immediately released him and stepped back. The room fell completely silent. The 300 SEALs had just watched someone half Thompson's size escape from what appeared to be an inescapable hold and reversed the situation completely. The demonstration had moved beyond impressive into the realm of the seemingly impossible. Thompson straightened his uniform and looked at Sarah with genuine admiration. Ma'am, I have to say, I've never seen anything like that. I had no idea techniques like that even existed. Chun and Johnson nodded in agreement, their earlier skepticism completely replaced by professional interest. Other SEALs began asking questions about the specific techniques and requesting clarification on various movements they had observed. Senior Chief Rodriguez stepped forward to address the room. Gentlemen, I think we can all agree that Chief Mitchell has demonstrated expertise that will be valuable to our training program. Commander Harrison looked relieved that the demonstrations had concluded without injury, but also impressed by what he had witnessed. Chief Mitchell, thank you for that educational demonstration. I think you've established your credentials quite effectively. Sarah nodded respectfully. Thank you, sir. I look forward to working with your personnel over the next 2 weeks. As the briefing concluded and the SEALs began filing out of the room, many stopped to speak with Sarah directly. The questions were no longer skeptical challenges, but genuine requests for information about techniques and training methods. Petty Officer Thompson was among the last to leave. Ma'am, I want to apologize if my questions seemed confrontational. We're used to instructors who talk a good game, but can't back it up. Sarah smiled. No apology necessary, Petty Officer Thompson. You were doing exactly what you should do, questioning claims and demanding proof. That's the mark of a professional. As the room emptied, Sarah reflected on what had just occurred. She had successfully established her credibility with one of the most elite military units in the world, but she knew that this was just the beginning of the challenge ahead. The next morning arrived with the typical California coastal fog that would burn off by mid-morning. Sarah had spent the evening reviewing her training plans and preparing for the first official session with the SEALs. She arrived at the training facility an hour early to set up the equipment and review the space where she would be conducting the hands-on instruction. The training area was a large gymnasium-style room with padded floors and enough space to accommodate multiple training groups simultaneously. Mirrors lined one wall, and various training equipment was stored along the perimeter. Sarah arranged training mats in specific configurations that would allow her to demonstrate techniques to groups of different sizes. As the SEALs began arriving for the first training session, Sarah noticed a significant difference in their attitude compared to the previous day. The skeptical glances had been replaced by curious attention, and several men approached her directly to ask questions about specific techniques they had witnessed during the demonstration. Petty Officer Thompson was among the first to arrive, and he approached Sarah with obvious enthusiasm. "Ma'am, I've been thinking about yesterday's demonstration all night. I've trained in martial arts for over a decade, and I've never seen techniques like what you showed us." Sarah appreciated his honest interest. The techniques are based on principles that aren't commonly taught in traditional martial arts programs. They're specifically designed for military applications where the stakes are life and death. Senior Chief Rodriguez entered with a group of experienced SEALs, all of whom had been present for the previous day's demonstrations. "Chief Mitchell, my men have been talking nonstop about what they saw yesterday. I think you'll find them very motivated students today." As the full group assembled, Sarah could see that word had spread beyond those who had been present for the original demonstration. The room was packed with SEALs who had heard second-hand accounts of what had occurred and wanted to see the techniques for themselves. Commander Harrison arrived just as the session was scheduled to begin. "Chief Mitchell, I understand there's been considerable interest in your training program. Several additional personnel have requested to observe today's session." Sarah looked around the room and estimated that nearly 400 SEALs were now present, significantly more than the original 300. "That's fine, sir. I can accommodate observers as long as we have enough space for the practical exercises." She moved to the center of the room and called for attention. "Today we're going to start with the fundamental principles underlying the techniques you saw yesterday. Before we practice specific movements, I want everyone to understand the theory behind why these techniques work." Sarah began with an explanation of leverage, balance, and momentum as they applied to close-quarters combat. She used volunteer demonstrations to illustrate each principle, showing how small applications of force could produce disproportionately large results when applied correctly. Petty Officer Chen raised his hand. "Ma'am, these principles make sense in theory, but how do you apply them in high-stress combat situations? In real operations, you don't have time to think through the physics." Sarah nodded approvingly at the question. "That's exactly why we drill these techniques until they become instinctive. The goal isn't to think through the principles during combat, but to train your body to apply them automatically." She called for volunteers and began demonstrating the basic escape techniques from various common restraint scenarios. Each technique was broken down into component parts, practiced slowly, and then gradually increased in speed and intensity. As the training progressed, Sarah noticed that the SEALs were picking up the techniques remarkably quickly. Their existing combat training had given them excellent body awareness and movement control, which translated well to the new techniques she was teaching. Petty Officer Second Class Davis, who had been practicing with Thompson, paused to ask a question. "Chief, these techniques seem to work great against single opponents. But what about the multiple attacker scenarios you showed us yesterday?" Sarah smiled. "I'm glad you asked. Multiple attacker techniques build on the same principles, but they require additional elements like timing and positioning." She called for several volunteers and began demonstrating how to use attackers' movements against each other. "The key," she explained, "was to position yourself so that opponents interfered with each other while you maintained mobility and striking opportunities." As she demonstrated the technique, Sarah noticed that several SEALs were recording the session with their phones. "Gentlemen, I need to ask that recording devices be put away during instruction. Some of these techniques are classified training materials." The phones disappeared immediately, but Sarah could tell that the men were paying even closer attention, understanding that they were learning something truly unique. Senior Chief Martinez, a veteran with nearly 20 years of experience, raised his hand. "Ma'am, I've been through every advanced combat course the military offers, and I've never seen techniques this effective. Where did you develop these methods? Sarah paused, considering how much of her background she should reveal. These techniques were developed through necessity during deployment operations. When conventional methods weren't sufficient, we had to innovate or face mission failure. She could see that this answer only increased their interest. These were men who understood the harsh realities of combat and could appreciate techniques born from operational necessity rather than academic theory. As the morning session continued, Sarah introduced increasingly complex scenarios. She showed the SEALs how to escape from zip-tie restraints, how to defend against knife attacks in confined spaces, and how to neutralize armed opponents when firearms weren't available. Each demonstration brought new challenges and questions from the assembled SEALs. They tested the techniques against their own experience and training, looking for weaknesses or limitations. Sarah welcomed these challenges as they helped refine the instruction and demonstrated the technique's effectiveness. During a brief break, Commander Harrison approached Sarah privately. "Chief, I have to say, this is some of the most engaged I've ever seen my personnel during a training session. The feedback I'm getting is universally positive." Sarah appreciated the commander's support. "Thank you, sir. These men are exceptional students. Their existing training gives them a foundation that makes this instruction much more effective." When the session resumed, Sarah introduced scenario-based training where teams of SEALs would rotate through different simulated combat situations. Each scenario was designed to present challenges that would require the techniques they had been learning. The first scenario involved a hostage rescue operation where the SEALs had to neutralize guards without using firearms to avoid endangering civilians. Teams of 4 SEALs worked together to apply the techniques they had learned, with Sarah providing guidance and feedback. Petty Officer Thompson's team was the first to complete their scenario successfully. "Ma'am, the way these techniques work together is incredible. We neutralized 4 opponents without making any noise or causing any injuries that would prevent them from being questioned later." Other teams quickly adopted and modified the techniques for their specific scenarios. Sarah was impressed by how creatively the SEALs adapted the basic principles to meet different tactical requirements. The second scenario presented a situation where SEALs were captured and needed to escape from restraints while avoiding detection. This required precise timing and complete silence, skills that built on the morning's instruction. Petty Officer Johnson's team demonstrated an innovative approach that combined several techniques in a sequence Sarah hadn't considered. "Chief, we found that if you modify the restraint escape technique slightly, you can free multiple personnel simultaneously without alerting guards." Sarah examined their modification and realized they had identified a legitimate improvement to the standard technique. "That's excellent work. This is exactly the kind of adaptation these principles are designed to support." As the afternoon session progressed, Sarah noticed that the SEALs were beginning to develop their own variations and combinations. Their military experience and tactical training were allowing them to see applications she hadn't fully explored. Senior Chief Rodriguez approached her during another break. "Ma'am, my men are asking if there's any way to extend this training program. 2 weeks doesn't seem like enough time to fully develop proficiency in these techniques." Sarah considered the request. "I'd be open to discussing an extension with Commander Harrison. There are definitely more advanced techniques we could cover with additional time." The final exercise of the day was a free-form scenario where teams of SEALs could choose their own objectives and methods. Sarah observed and provided guidance as needed, but she was impressed by how independently the teams operated. One team successfully infiltrated and secured a simulated enemy facility without being detected by the opposing force. Another team demonstrated how the techniques could be used for prisoner escort and control in hostile territory. As the day concluded, Sarah gathered the entire group for a debriefing session. "Today you've demonstrated that these techniques aren't just effective in demonstration settings, but can be adapted for real tactical scenarios." Petty Officer Thompson raised his hand. "Ma'am, speaking for the group, we'd like you to know that this has been some of the most valuable training we've received. These techniques fill gaps in our existing capabilities that we didn't even realize existed." The sentiment was echoed by nods and comments throughout the room. Sarah could see that she had not only established credibility with these elite operators, but had provided them with genuinely useful tools for their missions. Commander Harrison stepped forward to address the group. Gentlemen, I want to thank Chief Mitchell for an outstanding first day of training. Based on what I've observed today, I'm confident this program will significantly enhance our operational capabilities. As the SEALs filed out of the training area, many stopped to thank Sarah personally or ask questions about specific techniques. The transformation from the previous day's skepticism to today's enthusiasm was remarkable. Senior Chief Rodriguez was among the last to leave. Chief Mitchell, I've been in special operations for 18 years, and I've never seen training that so immediately improved our capabilities. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Sarah packed her equipment and reflected on the day's progress. The SEALs had exceeded her expectations as students, and their tactical expertise had actually improved several of her techniques. She looked forward to seeing how they would continue to develop over the remaining days of the program. By the second week of training, word had spread throughout the entire Naval Special Warfare community about the exceptional instruction taking place at Coronado. Sarah arrived each morning to find not only her original students, but also visitors from other SEAL teams, instructors from various military schools, and even some civilian contractors who worked with special operations units. Commander Harrison had been fielding requests from other commands to observe or participate in the training. Chief Mitchell, I've received calls from DevGru, Delta Force, and even some international special operations units asking about your program. The reputation of what's happening here has spread far beyond our facility. Sarah was both pleased and somewhat overwhelmed by the attention. Sir, I'm honored by the interest, but I want to make sure we maintain the quality of instruction for the original students. The training had evolved significantly from the first day's basic techniques. The SEALs had mastered the fundamental principles and were now working on advanced applications that combined multiple techniques in complex scenarios. Their tactical expertise had actually pushed Sarah to develop new variations she hadn't previously considered. Senior Chief Rodriguez had become an informal assistant instructor, helping to demonstrate techniques and work with smaller groups. Chief, the men are asking if you'd be willing to develop some techniques specifically for underwater operations. We encounter unique challenges in maritime environments that could benefit from your approach. This request intrigued Sarah because it represented an area she hadn't fully explored. That's an interesting challenge. The physics are different underwater, but the basic principles should still apply with modifications. She spent the evening researching underwater combat techniques and developing theoretical applications of her methods. The next morning, she presented her ideas to a group of combat swimmers and received immediate feedback on the practical challenges they faced. Petty Officer Chun, who had become one of her most dedicated students, worked with her to test underwater applications in the facility's dive tank. Ma'am, the leverage techniques work underwater, but they require completely different body positioning because of buoyancy. Together, they developed modified techniques that accounted for the underwater environment. The other SEALs were fascinated by these applications, as they represented solutions to problems they had faced in actual operations. As the training progressed, Sarah noticed that the SEALs were becoming creative in ways that surprised her. They began combining her techniques with their existing skills in unexpected combinations that often produced superior results. Petty Officer Thompson had been working on integrating the hand-to-hand techniques with weapons transitions. Chief, we've found that your balanced disruption techniques create perfect opportunities for disarming opponents and accessing our own weapons. His team demonstrated a sequence where they would neutralize multiple attackers using her techniques, then seamlessly transition to firearms for engaging distant threats. The fluid integration of different combat systems was impressive even to Sarah. The reputation of the training program had reached such levels that Sarah received a visit from General Patricia Williams, a two-star Army general who oversaw special operations training programs across all services. The general arrived with a small team of observers and requested a comprehensive demonstration. Chief Mitchell, the general said after introductions, I've heard remarkable things about your training program. I'm here to evaluate whether these techniques should be integrated into our broader special operations training curriculum. Sarah felt the weight of this opportunity. If the techniques were adopted across all special operations units, it could significantly impact military capabilities worldwide. General, I'd be honored to demonstrate the program for you. She organized a comprehensive display that showcased not only the techniques themselves, but also how they had been adapted and improved by the SEALs. The demonstration included basic applications, advanced combinations, underwater modifications, and the creative variations developed by the students. General Williams watched with obvious interest as teams of SEALs demonstrated proficiency levels that had been achieved in just over a week of training. She asked detailed questions about training time requirements, injury rates, and operational applications. Chief Mitchell, this level of capability development in such a short time frame is extraordinary, the general commented. How do you account for the rapid skill acquisition we're observing? Sarah had been thinking about this question herself. General, I believe it's the combination of the students' existing high-level skills and the fact that these techniques are designed for immediate practical application rather than long-term theoretical study. The general nodded and continued her evaluation. She observed advanced scenarios where SEALs demonstrated the techniques under stress, with multiple opponents, and in complex environmental conditions. One particularly impressive demonstration involved a hostage rescue scenario where a team had to neutralize armed guards in a confined space without alerting other enemies or endangering civilians. The team completed the mission flawlessly using techniques they had learned just days earlier. After several hours of observation, General Williams met privately with Sarah and Commander Harrison. Chief Mitchell, I'm prepared to recommend that these techniques be evaluated for integration into our special operations training standards. This was exactly the outcome Sarah had hoped for, but she wanted to ensure it was implemented correctly. General, I'd recommend a phased approach that allows for proper instructor development and quality control. The general agreed and outlined a plan for Sarah to train a cadre of instructors who could then disseminate the techniques throughout the special operations community. Chief, would you be willing to extend your current assignment to support this expanded program? Sarah didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored to contribute to improving our special operations capabilities. With this decision made, the remaining days of the original training program took on additional significance. The SEALs knew they were participating in something that would influence military training for years to come. The final week included advanced scenario training that pushed the techniques to their limits. Sarah created challenges that required the SEALs to adapt their skills to unprecedented situations, testing both their technical proficiency and their ability to innovate under pressure. One scenario involved a simulated terrorist attack on a cruise ship where the SEALs had to neutralize threats while protecting civilians in cramped conditions with limited visibility. Another required them to rescue hostages from a multi-story building using only hand-to-hand techniques due to the risk of structural collapse from explosives. In each case, the SEALs demonstrated not only mastery of the techniques Sarah had taught, but also the ability to modify and combine them in ways that exceeded her expectations. They had truly internalized the underlying principles rather than just memorizing movements. Petty Officer Johnson's team developed an innovative approach to the cruise ship scenario that involved coordinated timing between multiple operators to neutralize threats simultaneously across different deck levels. Their solution was so elegant that Sarah incorporated it into her standard training materials. Senior Chief Rodriguez had been documenting the various adaptations and improvements developed during the training. Chief, the men have created over 30 distinct variations of your basic techniques. Some of these modifications are genuinely superior to the original methods. This collaborative development process had exceeded Sarah's expectations. She had come to teach the SEALs her techniques, but they had contributed so much to the program that it had become a truly joint development effort. The training culminated in a comprehensive exercise that tested every aspect of the skills they had developed. Teams of SEALs were presented with complex scenarios that required immediate adaptation and creative problem-solving using the techniques they had learned. The exercise took place over a full day and included scenarios ranging from close-quarters building clearing to underwater operations to vehicle-based combat situations. Each team was evaluated not only on their technical proficiency, but also on their ability to adapt and innovate. Every team performed at levels that would have been considered exceptional even for seasoned special operations personnel. More importantly, they demonstrated the ability to continue developing and improving the techniques based on their operational experience. Commander Harrison observed the final exercise with obvious pride. Chief Mitchell, in 25 years of military service, I've never seen training that so dramatically improved operational capabilities in such a short time. The SEALs themselves were equally impressed with their progress. Petty Officer Thompson, who had been the most skeptical during the initial demonstration, approached Sarah after the final exercise. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology for my initial attitude. This training has fundamentally changed how I think about combat." As the program concluded, Sarah reflected on what had been accomplished. The SEALs had not only learned her techniques, but had improved upon them and adapted them for applications she had never considered. The collaborative process had produced results that exceeded what either she or they could have achieved independently. General Williams returned for the final demonstration and was visibly impressed by the capabilities the SEALs had developed. "Chief Mitchell, this program has exceeded all expectations. I'm authorizing immediate implementation of the Instructor Development Program." The success of the training program at Coronado would serve as the foundation for integrating these techniques throughout the Special Operations community. Sarah had accomplished far more than she had originally envisioned when she first arrived at the facility. 6 months after the Coronado training program concluded, Sarah found herself at the Pentagon briefing senior military leadership on the implementation of her techniques across all Special Operations forces. The small conference room was filled with generals, admirals, and senior civilian officials responsible for military training and operations. General Williams, who had observed the original SEAL training, was presenting the results of the expanded program. "Ladies and gentlemen, the techniques developed by Chief Mitchell have been successfully integrated into training programs across all Special Operations commands. The results have exceeded our most optimistic projections." She displayed charts showing reduced training time, improved performance metrics, and positive feedback from operators who had completed the new curriculum. Most significantly, we've seen a 40% reduction in training-related injuries while simultaneously improving skill acquisition rates. Admiral Robert Chun, the commander of Naval Special Warfare, stood to address the group. "I can speak directly to the impact of this training on our SEAL teams. The original Coronado class has been deployed on 7 missions since completing the program, and their after-action reports consistently highlight the effectiveness of these techniques." Sarah listened as senior leaders discussed specific operational successes that had been directly attributed to the training. A hostage rescue in Syria, a ship boarding operation in the Gulf of Aden, and several urban combat situations had all benefited from the techniques the SEALs had learned and adapted. General Michael Foster from Army Special Operations Command provided additional details. "Our Delta Force units have reported that these techniques have filled capability gaps they didn't realize existed. The program has become one of our most requested training opportunities." The discussion turned to expanding the program beyond special operations to conventional military units. Sarah had been working with training commands to develop modified versions appropriate for different skill levels and operational requirements. "Chief Mitchell," said Secretary of Defense Patricia Martinez, "your program has demonstrated measurable improvements in military capabilities while reducing costs and training time. This represents exactly the kind of innovation our defense establishment needs." After the briefing, Sarah was approached by Colonel James Rodriguez, the son of Senior Chief Rodriguez from the original Coronado training. "Ma'am, my father talks about your training program constantly. He says it was the most significant professional development experience of his career." Sarah smiled at the connection. "Your father was instrumental in making that program successful. His experience and leadership helped establish the credibility we needed with the other SEALs." The colonel nodded. "He's actually using the techniques in his current assignment as a senior instructor. The feedback from his students has been overwhelmingly positive." As Sarah left the Pentagon that evening, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. What had started as a 2-week training assignment had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of military hand-to-hand combat instruction. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Petty Officer Thompson, who was now serving as a SEAL instructor himself. "Chief, just finished teaching your techniques to a new class. These guys picked it up even faster than we did. The program keeps getting better." Thompson had become one of the most effective instructors in the expanded program, using his initial skepticism and subsequent conversion to help convince new students of the technique's value. His classes consistently received the highest ratings from participants. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the Army's Special Operations Training Facility, where she was conducting an instructor development course. 20 carefully selected personnel from various special operations units were learning to teach the techniques to others. Master Sergeant Lisa Park, one of the first female instructors in the program, was demonstrating a technique to a group of male special operations personnel twice her size. The key principle here is that size and strength become irrelevant when you understand leverage and timing, she explained while effortlessly neutralizing a much larger opponent. Sarah watched with satisfaction as Park, who had initially struggled with the physical demands of special operations training, now commanded complete respect from some of the military's most elite personnel. The techniques had leveled playing fields that had previously seemed impossible to balance. Captain David Chun, a Marine Force reconnaissance officer, approached Sarah during a break. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know that these techniques probably saved my life during our last deployment. We were compromised during a reconnaissance mission, and I was able to neutralize 2 enemy personnel silently using your methods." These operational success stories had become increasingly common as more units completed the training. Sarah maintained a database of after-action reports that documented specific instances where the techniques had proven decisive in real-world situations. The instructor development course concluded with each candidate demonstrating their ability to teach a complete lesson to their peers. The quality of instruction had improved dramatically as the program matured, with each generation of instructors building upon the lessons learned by their predecessors. Senior Chief Rodriguez, now serving as the program's senior enlisted advisor, evaluated the final demonstrations. Chief Mitchell, the quality of these instructors represents the best we've ever produced. They understand not just the techniques, but the principles underlying them. As the formal program activities concluded, Sarah was approached by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a researcher from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. "Chief Mitchell, we'd like to discuss incorporating your techniques into our research on human performance enhancement." The conversation revealed opportunities to integrate the training with advanced technologies and scientific research that could further multiply its effectiveness. Sarah was intrigued by the possibility of combining her practical experience with cutting-edge research. That evening, Sarah attended a dinner hosted by General Williams to celebrate the program's success. The event was attended by many of the original Coronado SEALs, along with senior leaders who had supported the program's expansion. Petty Officer Johnson, now promoted to Chief Petty Officer, gave a toast to Chief Mitchell, who showed us that the most important weapon we carry is our ability to think creatively and adapt to any situation. Commander Harrison, who had taken some risk by supporting the original demonstration, was now recognized as a visionary leader for identifying the program's potential. Chief Mitchell changed not only how we fight, but how we think about fighting, he said during his remarks. As the evening concluded, Sarah found herself in conversation with several of the original SEALs who had been most skeptical during the first demonstration. Thompson, Chun, and Johnson had all become advocates and instructors in the expanded program. "Chief," Thompson said, "I have to admit, when I first saw you walk into that briefing room, I never imagined we'd be sitting here celebrating a program that's been implemented throughout the entire special operations community." Chun nodded in agreement. "Your techniques have become standard operating procedure for situations we encounter regularly. It's hard to imagine how we operated effectively without them," Johnson added. "The most important thing you taught us wasn't just the techniques themselves, but the mindset that there's always a better way to accomplish the mission if you're willing to think creatively." As Sarah drove home that night, she received a call from her former commander in Army Special Operations. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that the techniques you developed have been requested by Allied Special Operations Forces. We're getting inquiries from British SAS, German KSK, and Australian SASR about training opportunities." This international interest represented another expansion opportunity that could multiply the program's impact globally. Sarah had already begun preliminary discussions about developing modified curricula appropriate for different military cultures and operational environments. The success of the program had exceeded every expectation Sarah had when she first arrived at Coronado for what she thought would be a routine training assignment. The skeptical SEALs who had challenged her credentials had become the program's strongest advocates and most effective instructors. More importantly, the collaborative development process had produced techniques and training methods that were genuinely superior to what either she or the SEALs could have developed independently. The program represented the best aspects of military innovation, practical experience combined with creative thinking and rigorous testing. As Sarah reflected on the journey from that first tense demonstration to the current global expansion, she realized that the most significant accomplishment wasn't the techniques themselves, but the demonstration that innovation and improvement were always possible when talented people were willing to challenge assumptions and work together toward common goals. The program that had started with 300 skeptical SEALs watching a small woman claim she could teach them something new about combat had evolved into a transformation of military training that was improving operational capabilities worldwide. The success proved that the most important victories often begin with someone willing to step forward and demonstrate that there's always a better way.